So the story of Prototype 2 takes place 14 months after the story of the first game. Now, at the end of the first game, Alex Mercer has reconstituted himself on the shores of Manhattan after a nuclear explosion offshore. Now, obviously, he's still alive, and over the next 14 months, we don't know what he's been up to. And so in Prototype 2, we now have a new protagonist, Sergeant James Heller. Now, Sergeant Heller has been fighting a war in Iraq during the second outbreak in New York City, in Manhattan, and he's in conversations with his wife about the outbreak, and she's getting very, very concerned. Blackwatch have now taken over the area. There's more infected. They've closed their daughter's school, and he's telling them, look, Blackwatch know what they're doing, listen to them. I'll be back soon, and then we can leave. And so what's happened now is he arrives too late. The infected have killed his family. And coming from the military side, he knows that the person who released the virus in New York in the first game was Alex Mercer. So now he decides that no matter what cost, he's going to kill Alex Mercer in revenge of his family's death. Now again, because it's 14 months later, Alex Mercer has his own plans. And his own plans involve infecting Sergeant James Heller, creating the next prototype, which is of course very ironic because he's now given Heller the powers to take Mercer down. And so that's where our kind of story begins in Prototype 2. And it's the collision of their two stories which creates kind of turning points and leads to a very climactic prototype versus prototype battle. And so it makes it very interesting. And of course, underlying that all is the story of New York Zero and all the three zones that have been formed because of the outbreak. There's much more variety in the Prototype 2 gameplay, both in the combat side and the non-combat side. So in the combat side, we've re-envisioned and redone the powers that were really the fan favorites in the first game, like the claws, the blades, the hammer fist, the whip fist. And we've introduced a new power called the tendrils, which is very, very visceral and very, very visual in the remnants that it leaves behind. A great power. And we've also tuned the enemies to deal with different powers quite differently. So, for example, claws are great for tearing through flesh, but not so good for going through an armored vehicle like a tank. And then you've got hammer fist, which is really good for that, but is a slower type of attack, so is more vulnerable to fast enemies. And then we've also got better enemy tells, so now a player knows if they're going to be hit from behind or from the sides, for example. So it really on the combat side has given more control to the player. And then if you look at the non-combat side, the brand new hunting ability. So now, as opposed to finding a target in the world based on an icon on a mini-map, you're now actively hunting by using a human sonar to echolocate targets in the world, making you feel like a real predator. And then there's the stealth consume on top of that, which we've also created gameplay around. So if you try and stealth consume a soldier or blackwatch or scientist, and one of those three types is watching, you can't. You have to now systematically take out those that are watching first. So it's really broadened. So we've really created more depth and more breadth in the kind of gameplay in Prototype 2. Prototype 2 has that great story gameplay like you would have had in the first game. In fact, we've actually gone some route of having some nonlinear story elements in the game, in the story side. And then we've got the open world missions, which really complement the fiction of the zones, because unlike the first game where they were really just kind of core mechanic type of events, these are ones that really tie back into the fiction, that tell you more about the world, that give you great mutations of rewards. And there is hours of gameplay outside of the story mission, and then there's the free roam on its own. So if you look at playing the story mission, the open world missions, and everything you can do in free roam, you're looking at a long time of play. So this is where what you want an open world, right? An open world needs to have all of those together. So even if you just want to go play in the sandbox for an hour or two, you go ahead and do that. Or 20 hours if you want, right? It really is kind of up to the player to decide.